Good afternoon. We at Conejo CV Moore Park Association of Realtors are so glad you've joined us today. I'm Brooke Grayson. I chair CSMAR's Equal Opportunity, Cultural Diversity, and Community Outreach Committee. I'm sorry, Advisory Council. We just changed names to advisory councils. And we are so excited to introduce our guest speaker to you today, Bill Dedman. He's a reporter with the investigation team for Long Island Divided, a documentary published recently that revealed real estate agents in Long Island who were caught in discriminatory practices in their business. Moderating our webinar today is Tommy Militello, member of the Equal Opportunity Advisory Council. Before we get started, you can type your questions in the chat, and after Mr. Deadman's presentation, I will moderate any questions that came in for him to respond to. And yes, this webinar is being recorded, so we will upload it to our YouTube channel for anyone to watch the webinar at any time. And with that, Tommy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Brooke. My name is Tommy. I'll be moderating the event this afternoon. If you haven't seen this documentary, you need to. Okay, we're going to discuss steering, how to avoid it. We're also going to talk about the best practices for ensuring fair treatment. It's my pleasure to introduce our very special guest today, Bill Dedman. Bill is a Pulitzer and Peabody award-winning investigative reporter. He's a best-selling author and a keynote speaker. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, HUD, and banking and real estate associations. Bill received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in Investigative Reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal, Constitution on the Color of Money. This was a series on racial discrimination by banks and savings and loan associations in the middle-income black neighborhoods. 30 years later, Bill was one of 4 lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents, Long Island Divided. Published in November 2019, the investigation revealed that Long Island's dominant residential real estate brokerages help reinforce racial segregation through illegal steering of customers. Bill is reported for the Associated Press, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Boston Globe. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Tommy, and Brooke and Evelyn and everybody who helped put this together. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to have an opportunity to share with you an inside look at our Newsday team's work on fair housing. You know, it might be surprising to you. It was certainly surprising to me that NAR and local real estate associations have responded positively to a newspaper's investigation. We don't get a lot of that. Just last week, I was out in front of the Long Island Board of Realtors talking about our investigation on Long Island. An interesting invitation. It seems that our team's work on fair housing has sparked an important conversation and also action with industry leaders saying these are practices that must change and must change soon. Let me give you a couple of examples. When the head of Realogy, now called Anywhere Real Estate, but you know it's the largest real estate company in the United States, owns Coldwell Banker and Century 21 and other brands. When that CEO says, we should be testing our own agents and brokers for steering and unequal treatment of customers, well, then something has changed. When several realtor associations at the state level and some large city associations have begun to organize programs to test their own members for unequal treatment, then change is happening quickly. And when NAR has embraced this idea of self-testing of agents, NAR says, we'll help make that happen. More change is coming. The thinking seems to be, if we don't get ahead of this as an industry, policing ourselves, then we'll have more government investigations and we'll keep having these kinds of embarrassing media investigations. Besides, there's a recognition that it's the right thing to fix this and that fair housing is the law. not just in April. My goal for this session is for it to be helpful to you, but also challenging, giving you something to think about. How does it work in our office? How can unequal treatment creep into our day-to-day work? So together we'll dive into looking at a few clips of our Newsday video of real estate agents in action. Admittedly, perhaps not on their best days. And we'll focus on best practices, steps that brokers and agents can take to treat everyone equally. You might keep a list of specific steps that you might talk about in your brokerage. We'll compare lists at the end. We also will talk about some of the most difficult questions, such as what can agents say about schools? I start with this perspective. I assume that all of you want to make sure that every customer who calls or emails or walks into your office is treated fairly.
Thank you, Bill. So I have a question. You won the Pulitzer Prize for an investigation into mortgage lending practices. I thought it might be interesting for our viewers today to hear a brief summary of that investigation. And how does that investigation compare with this one?
Tommy, there are several connections and lessons that apply. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. You can read those online. These stories were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders, particularly banks, doing business on one part of the map but not another. Now, this was back in the late 1980s, and redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and other cities making home loans in white areas, even lower income white areas, but not, for example, in Atlanta's higher income black areas that were home to executives from Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. It's interesting that the customer would have no way to know where the banks don't make loans. But we looked at how the banks operated. We found differences in where branches had been opened and closed, differences in which real estate agents the banks marketed to, even which branches would accept a loan application. Now, let's connect that to a project for the Boston Globe in the 2000s, looking at something you'd think would be quite different: racial profiling and traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap, and you can read it online. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we all deserve the ticket. We are all pre-qualified for the speeding ticket. But some people may get a break that others don't get. Well, what we found was that in Massachusetts, when we looked at every traffic ticket and warning in the state, it's pretty easy to predict who gets a ticket and who gets a warning if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For example, women much more often got a warning, not the ticket, especially younger women. Does it surprise you, women, that that break for women runs out at about age 40? I talked with a college student. She had gotten 4 warnings in 3 weeks. Minorities much more often got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men, for going the same speed as others who got the warning. Now, notice that again, the customers, let's call the drivers customers, wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. Now, 3 very different stories: redlining, traffic tickets, steering, and real estate. A few lessons up front. First, the absence of complaints tells you nothing about whether your office is obeying the law. Bank customers, drivers on the highway, real estate customers have no way to know if they're being treated equally. You don't know who else got a warning or a ticket, and you don't see the listings that other customers are given. So a fix for steering can't be just to say, well, we respond forcefully to all complaints. No one would know to complain. Second, Diversity efforts alone will not solve this problem. Diversity in hiring and promotion is useful in many ways, in your business and ours. But it's not a cure-all. People often ask, were the minority real estate agents also discriminating? Yes, many of them were. And that's just as illegal. We found real estate agents of all races and backgrounds steering customers. Just as we found white and black police officers treating minorities different from whites. We should no longer be surprised about this. Treating people differently is illegal whether you're in their group or not in their group. So it might be time to stop thinking of fair housing as a diversity issue, something nice to have, and start thinking of it as a risk reduction issue. Third, small actions, small policies, even the absence of oversight can have a huge impact in creating and perpetuating a segregated system. For example, it seemed clear that the realtors in our tests didn't have a rigorous standard for what they do and don't do with every customer. No checklist. We saw customers come back with thick folders of information, others with skinny folders from the same agent. That seems like something that you can fix. Do agents have consistent ways of qualifying customers? Ask credit scores and income of everyone or no one? Require pre-approval from every buyer? That's legal. Or require pre-approval from no one? You'll help them get ready to buy a home? That's legal. It's in between where maybe you have a policy, but some people get the break that others don't get. That's how you end up in the newspaper. I'd like to show you an introductory part of our documentary film. The project is called Long Island Divided, and the film version is called Testing the Divide. We'll give you the address for it. In this clip, one customer receives service from an agent, while the same agent refuses to help another customer in the same circumstance. Let me play this video for you, share it with you. Just a moment. Okay, here we go. It's coming around on the guitar.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything you want to unless you don't want to store your car to buy your friend.
Or that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester. And they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I asked. My husband's working with somebody in a bank.
We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approved.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification limit. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny May couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Wow. So, Bill, can you tell us, why did Newsday start this investigation in the beginning?
Oh, yes. Well, let me set the scene a little bit. Long Island, some of you may know, stretches east of New York City. It's a suburban area with almost 3 million people in 2 counties. And Long Island has a lot of diversity overall, people of all races and nationalities, but minority groups, especially black homeowners, are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 communities on Long Island, a majority of the black residents live in only 8. Now, is that by choice? We long have heard from black homebuyers encountering problems trying to buy a home outside of those few areas. So Newsday's editor and publisher asked me to figure out how to document whether or not that's happening. Our team followed the methods used by fair housing agencies, sending out testers, with the addition of hidden cameras to record video and audio. Let's talk about the law. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states. Most state laws say recording is legal if one person in the conversation knows that it's being taped, and that one person can be the home buyer, the tester. Hidden recording of audio is not legal in a dozen states, including California. In your state, everyone on the conversation has to know they're being recorded. But don't think that takes you off the hook. We can still do testing. We can interview the testers. We can have them write down what happened. We can monitor the texts and emails between the testers and the agents. And most of all, we can see the listings that the agents give to each tester. Now, sometimes testing is done to support a lawsuit. Other times it's done for state enforcement. The main reason we did testing is that it's the only way to see reliably what is happening. Our testers often came back from the real estate office to the newspaper office telling us that agent was so nice, she was so helpful. They only learned the truth, whether they were being treated differently, better, worse, when our team brought the buyers together to watch videos and to see the maps of the listings that they were given. Here's a video clip where you'll meet a few of our testers and also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them. And you'll meet one agent, a second-generation realtor, who had a different game plan for different customers. Let me start that video for you. Okay, here we go. It's coming around.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test, and you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, you know, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, you know, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map. I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, you know, crime, resale.
You know, the agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different plan for home buyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off the highway until you get past these neighborhoods. That was one of the patterns that startled us, was when some agents began their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers they had just met, with inappropriate comments or guidance that violates the fair housing laws. I hate to say it, but for those agents, it seemed that steering was part of the service that they were selling.
Wow. So I was wondering quickly if you could give us a summary of the tests. So who was tested? What was the outcome?
Yes. Tommy, we focused just on home sales. Our team looked only at sales. Often testing is done of rental housing, but we didn't look at rentals. And we'd send a white home buyer and then a minority home buyer. And we'd randomly choose who would go see the agent first. Asian, then white, or white, then black, or Hispanic, then white. And the home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same age and gender. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women, so there wouldn't be a class difference there. They asked for the same geographic area, the same price range, and the same number of bedrooms. They had the same number of children in the public schools, and they were prepared to give the same income and credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, on which they were the same. We shopped for houses at different price ranges. Now, always the same price for two testers who were paired up together, but we did tests from entry level. Now, on Long Island, then entry level was about $400,000, so we started there. And we stepped up and did tests all the way up to a higher end of $7 million. Now, $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house in the celebrity Hamptons area on Long Island, but it would get you into his neighborhood. But then you'd have Alec Baldwin for a neighbor. Now, how did we pick the agents? We didn't pick them. We let the brokers pick which of their agents would be tested, though the brokers didn't know they were doing the picking. Whoever they had on the board, whoever was working desk duty, whoever was handling walk-ins or phone calls, that was our agent. And then we made sure that the second tester saw the same agent. If you think about it, we didn't have to do that part. Under the law, brokers, you're expected to provide the same service to two customers even if they see different agents. But we made it, we thought, a better test, a fairer test to see what would happen if the customers saw the same agent. So we gave the brokers a break there, a break that the next test might not give you. We did 86 of these tests, 86 pairs, at 12 companies, 12 brands, and we chose them because they're the largest in our area. Together, those 12 represent more than half of the listings in our market. And they're familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, RE/MAX, as well as regional brands that are big only on Long Island. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees, so we had 2 fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One, you met, runs a fair housing program and has done tests for the U.S. Department of Justice. And the other is the law professor from Kentucky who writes the legal textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. First, our team gave the agents and brokers all the details, invited them in to watch the videos, gave them time to check their records so they could respond. And we put the videos and their responses online so there'd be no out of context. So this was not a drive-by investigation. This was a careful effort that took more than 3 years. Now, the results. Asian American buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time. So 2 out of 10 on average. Latino American buyers were treated differently than whites 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And African American buyers were treated differently than whites 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for black customers, and that makes sense in light of historic discrimination and current events. But don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers or 2 out of 10 Asian buyers in our tests were treated differently, and we're half a century down the road from passage of the civil rights laws, then those seemed like surprising numbers as well. Out of 12 companies, only 2, and these were 2 small regional brands, those 2 were the only ones to pass all of their tests. So it's fair to say that most of the national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. Now, you no doubt have already asked yourself the most important question. Would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your communities? If this weekend in Moore Park and Westlake Village and Simi Valley, white and black and Latino and Asian home buyers go shopping for homes, or Christians and Muslims and Jews, or straight couples and gay couples and singles, if they're searching for homes with the same criteria, if they ask for the same thing, then on Monday morning in their email, will they be receiving the same listings? That's the test. Let's talk about what sort of differences we saw. First, we just saw different levels of service. Overall, our white testers got 50% more listings than their black counterparts. We saw differences in how buyers were screened. Some agents refused to help our black or Hispanic buyers unless they signed an exclusive contract. They said that's the policy of our brokerage. But the same client, the same agent, didn't require a contract for a white buyer. And we saw steering. For example, the agents in our test gave listings that directed 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers into different communities and different school districts altogether. No overlap with the areas that they gave whites. Agents said to one of our 2 testers, "Oh, you won't find anything for your money in that neighborhood," when listings were available there in the customer's price range. Agents steered white buyers, but not minorities, around areas that they portrayed as higher crime areas, even though we don't even have community by community crime rates on Long Island. And then there were inappropriate comments by agents, making comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about the schools, comments about crime or resale values as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from looking in those areas. That's steering too. Especially when the agent gives contrary information or leaves out that advice for the other buyers. It was fascinating. Minority buyers were not subjected to racial comments or inappropriate remarks. We're long past the days of signs that say whites only. Now it's more subtle. Only the white buyers heard the inappropriate comments about race and its proxies, schools, crime, and resale values. Here's a video clip that highlights this problem of inappropriate comments. Here we go. Yep, it's coming around.
Our community came in, and they really took over Springs in Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
All the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. We need United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has two school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you. I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
You know. I don't want to use the word stealing, but I try to use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah. How are you, Russ?
Hey, Russ.
Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be. I don't think you should be in Almont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, you know.
You know, it may be that some agents have gotten a message that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. And the comments made by the agents were so far over the line that they sort of get all the attention, right? I can't believe he said that. We may forget that often they crossed the legal line when they gave different listings to different customers, even without the illegal comments. Perhaps we need more attention to steering and differential treatment, more attention to what agents do, not just what they say. Are they giving the same listings? Are they providing equal professional service to all their customers?
Okay, thank you. So we're talking about steering. Can you elaborate more on how steering showed up in your tests?
Yes, Tommy. You know, we sometimes use steering as a little bit of a catch-all term for many different kinds of conduct, but let's talk about that conduct. We've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it for a moment, neighborhood by neighborhood. Both of our testers would ask for an area within, say, a half an hour commute of a certain community, within half an hour of Northport, let's say. Well, that creates a circle around Northport, right? And that circle may include many communities and school districts that may vary in race and ethnicity of the residents. But sometimes in the wider residential parts of that circle, listings would be given only to our white buyer. So we all see, in those cases, minorities were steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for. We also saw something else that we hadn't anticipated, and I suspect this has not gotten enough attention in brokerages. And I mention this because it's an area where I think new lawsuits under the Fair Housing Act are likely to occur. We had minority communities where no one of any race got the listings. Even with a modest amount of minority population, that happened. These minority areas are within the circle for both testers. There are homes for sale in the price range for both, but the agents didn't send those listings to either buyer. The agents ignored those areas for everyone. That's steering too. The agents in our test had more than 200 opportunities to share listings in the 8 largely Black and Hispanic communities in our area. 200 chances, and they shared listings in those communities only 15 times. Usually leapfrogging over those areas to reach out to farther away areas for the buyers. Now, in that case, not only are the home buyers being harmed, remember, under the law, both the minority and white home buyers are being harmed by not being given full access to available homes in all communities. Who's protected by the fair housing laws? Everyone is. But also the communities themselves are being harmed. The governments, the schools. There have been lawsuits like this under the Fair Housing Act. And here's what you may see in the next few years. Also harmed is anyone who's trying to sell a home in those areas and their listing brokers. All of these could have a lawsuit under the fair housing laws against the brokerages that are routinely steering everyone around their communities. And you understand why. Fewer buyers means lower sale prices, lower commissions, lower home values, lower home equity, and less money for a homeowner's retirement or sending the grandkids to college. And less tax money for schools and parks and libraries. You might say, oh, but the two testers were being treated equally, but that's not the only test. When I gave you numbers before, 19, 39, 49% treated differently, those didn't include all the additional tests where the agents may have broken the law by steering both buyers around the minority neighborhoods. This is a dangerous practice. Now here's a video clip with a classic example of steering, meaning directing buyers to areas that more closely match the buyer's race. In this example, an agent tells one family, now that's a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, that a community would be a good place to live, that it has the nicest neighbors. While the same agent warns another family, that's a man shopping for himself, his wife, and their teenager in the public schools, warns them that the same community is a dangerous place. Let me play that for you. You ready?
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people. When
we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
Now, let's think for a moment about the point where this agent went astray. The text message about the gang activity, that gets our attention. That's the memorable part. But focus for a moment on what happened earlier. Remember, both men were asking about an area that had Brentwood at its center. They asked for the same thing. She sent listings in Brentwood to the black family, but for the white family, she ignored Brentwood entirely. Even when the white buyer went on a home tour and said, hey, we printed out from online some listings in Brentwood. They're closer to where we need to be. He's throwing her a lifeline. She still didn't show those houses and sent the note about gang activity. The comment is a problem, but don't lose sight. Why didn't the agent give both families listings in the same area that they both asked for?
Thank you, Bill. So, do you think the agents included in the documentary were knowingly steering? I mean, some agents might believe that steering was unconscious or unintentional, that it wouldn't rise to a violation, say. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Tommy, I think this is an important point. Some agents did whisper or say out loud, I shouldn't be saying this, but I guess that's the real estate equivalent of, buddy, would you hold my beer? Something bad is about to happen. But the first point to keep in mind is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. If the bias is intentional, if the unequal treatment is intentional or not. The Fair Housing Act, your state law, covers behaviors, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. It's the effect of your action, not your intent, that matters. If a real estate agent is treating one person better or differently than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent and the broker have violated the law. To remind you, those categories in the federal law are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, such as having children or being pregnant. But in California and many other states, state laws add many additional protected classes. Now, although practically intent doesn't matter, it is interesting and useful to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider, well, why is it happening? We understand now that bias can be explicit or intentional within our consciousness, or bias can be implicit. Some scientists use the term unconscious bias to refer to this being an automatic process that may happen faster than we're even aware of it. By whatever name, it means that people who want to be fair can still act in unfair ways. We all understand we can treat people differently based on their identity, their appearance, their nationality, their skin color, their hairstyle, their religion, their accent, even their name. Here's an example from our study of real estate agents. Now, we didn't flunk anybody for this. No one failed a test for this. But I think it's an interesting example of what you might think of as affinity bias. I know you're in a sales business and you make an affinity with your buyers, right? Oh, you went to Michigan State. My brother-in-law went to Michigan State. I'm your agent. The agents in our tests were far more likely to tell the buyer where the agent lives. More likely to say, oh, you're looking around Northport and I live in Northport, or my kids went to the Northport schools. More likely to divulge that information about the agent when the buyer was white. Minority buyers were less likely to get that sort of personal information. And of course, where the agent chooses to live is guidance for the buyer. One of the agents offered babysitting help to our white buyer. You're looking in this area. I have a friend who could babysit for your kids. But our minority buyer had kids too, and the agent knew that. And she was looking in the same area, and the agent didn't even mention that she lived in or knew anyone there. That could be implicit bias at work. It appears that some real estate agents may have a strategy of profiling, that is, of assuming, consciously or unconsciously, that the person of color can't really afford homes in the price range they've given, or might not qualify for the mortgage, and might therefore be wasting the agent's time. That could explain sending out fewer listings, right? While accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. Let's talk about profiling for a minute. One of the tricky things about profiling is that it's so ineffective. Experts in several fields, such as law enforcement, say the real problem with profiling is that it doesn't work. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening, right? You have an idea of a profile. Which kids play violent video games or dress a certain way? These are not good predictors of who will be a school shooter. As any parent understands, that profile would fit way too many good kids and might miss the kid who's planning an attack. What's a better predictor? Conduct. Stockpiling weapons, having grievances at school, telling other students of plans, even vaguely, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Or think about airport security. Religion is not a good way to identify who's a terrorist. You see, police say they would waste investigative resources on innocent people because of what kind of person they are, and would miss people who are planning an attack based on what conduct they're doing. In real estate terms, you're in a commission business, so it would mean that you're leaving money on the table if you assume that this buyer wouldn't be a good customer and that buyer would. Besides, did we mention steering is illegal? So why do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll just make money faster with less effort if they show people homes where you'll feel comfortable. You heard an agent say that. But why even assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Why assume that this white person standing in your office or in the coffee shop with you isn't already married to someone of a different race or religion? Besides, steering is illegal. You know, agents could fear that appraisers or lenders would be biased, and that would make it harder to close a sale. There's a lot of evidence, going back for decades and right up to this year, of bias in lending and in appraisal that's not explained by the facts in the file. You may have seen the large study by Freddie Mac of appraisal differences and the well-publicized examples of home sellers whose appraisal went up when they removed evidence that a black person lived in the home. These subjects are getting a lot of attention from industry groups, from NAR, from HUD, and from the Department of Justice. Meanwhile, the legal burden is on you to treat every customer fairly. You know, there is a final logical explanation for steering, but I don't think it fits. A few agents may be doing it on purpose. I assume that's not really the common situation. There's There's too much steering going on for it to be accounted for by only bad people doing it. Good people have to be doing it too.
Wow, so we've covered a lot of ground already. I was wondering, what role did schools play in the actions of agents?
Yes. Tommy, you know, I don't know how it is there, but it may not be different. We heard agents on Long Island explain to our buyers everything is decided by schools. Agents touted one district over another. Some were blue ribbon and others were declining or not in demand. Often, agents gave different information to different buyers. Let's just step back and get a bit of context. American school districts and schools vary by race and other characteristics of the students. So that means that directing someone to a certain school is the same, under the law, as directing them to an area with higher or lower minority population, even if race isn't mentioned. It is a shock, but America's schools are more segregated now than they were in 1968, the year Congress approved the Fair Housing Act. And of course, school segregation and housing segregation are intertwined because we have school districts. You may have heard agents say, oh, I can't talk about schools, but the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Our legal advisors were clear on this. Agents can answer factual questions about schools or refer customers to websites. The legal problem arises when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or making comments about school test scores or demographics to steer some customers away from certain schools. Here's a discussion of schools in our video, and you'll hear from the law professor who was an advisor on our project. Just a moment. Okay, here it comes.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville School District?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
That last agent you saw writing out a list of schools was so helpful. She sent the two testers from the real estate office back to our newspaper office with different lists. How do you discuss school quality without violating the fair housing laws? The clear advice from NAR and from our experts is to limit your information to answering factual questions, or refer the buyer to factual information online, such as the state education department. But stay away from the trap of using or responding to opinions, such as good schools or nice schools. NAR keeps trying to warn its members, realtors are not experts in schools. What? We're not? Why not? Well, first of all, remember that different people want different things at a school. They're not one size fits all. Second, think about if you're judging what schools are best, you're probably using ratings that are built on school test scores. Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you, as educators know, how educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. Well, in America, education and wealth of parents is a very good predictor of their children's test scores. And in America, race is a very good predictor of the parents' education and wealth. So you see the problem. A so-called high-performing school may just be an area with wealthier, better educated parents. Those National Merit Scholars came into the 3rd grade as National Merit Scholars. Steering parents, or just the white parents, around schools with middling or lower test scores perpetuates segregation by income and race. It keeps the merry-go-round turning. It has a disparate impact on one group, and therefore it's illegal under the fair housing laws. Now, awareness of this pitfall is increasing. The rating services, such as greatschools.org, have made some changes to their ratings to put more of an emphasis on student improvement from grade to grade in the school. But still, the main ingredients in their cake tells you more about the parents, not about the quality of the schools. NAR suggests that you explain to parents that they need to do their homework. You know, it's okay to tell customers, hey, there are fair housing laws, and for good reason, that limit what advice any agent can give you about schools. It's okay to educate parents. Did you know that school test scores mostly tell you how educated the parents are? They don't tell you which schools are good. It's okay to tell parents, if schools are important to you, talk with other parents. Chat with the principal. Go see the teachers in the programs that are important to you. You know, if they were buying a boat, if boats were important to them, they'd go look at boats.
So, what was the reaction from the real estate industry and the government?
Well, Tommy, we'll cover this quickly. First I'm asked what happened to the agents in the videos. Well, most of them are still practicing. We know that disciplinary hearings for agents and brokers continue in New York. We'll see if anybody loses a license permanently. At least one agent gave up her license to avoid going through the charges. I know of 2 agents in our tests who won their cases. The agent you saw who warned the white buyer about gang activity and didn't warn the black buyer, just recently she got to keep her license, and the state is appealing. But the judge in the case criticized the state for not doing a good investigation. They didn't interview our testers. They didn't even bring into court the listings that they were given. So we'll see what happens in the other cases. We did see the agents and brokers testify in public before a state Senate committee. And you can watch this on YouTube. They all were sworn in. And the agent who said, follow the school bus, see what mothers are waiting to meet the bus, she said, I just meant for the customers to know where the bus routes were. The most surprising part of the hearing was that the brokers all said they had reviewed the tests and found nothing wrong. Their position seemed to be that if steering isn't announced, if they don't say it out loud, then it's not illegal. And you know better. And New York's legislature knew better and has approved new laws, and I'll mention them because laws have a tendency to creep from state to state. These are new laws in New York, and they were supported by the New York State Association of Realtors. More testing. Who pays for that testing? The industry does through a surcharge on approval or renewal of a license. More responsibility. For example, associate brokers who serve as an office manager now have the same duty of supervision under the law that the brokers have. And standardized procedures that were published. So every brokerage in New York has to put on its website, does it require mortgage pre-approval for buyers or not? Either one's okay, but it has to choose. Does it require ID from buyers? Either one's okay. Do you have to sign an exclusive agreement with that brokerage? Either one's okay, but you have to choose. And then there's some additional things, forms given to buyers and fair housing notices and more training. New York already had one of the strictest requirements for fair housing training, but our audits of the classes showed that the training was really poor. Now they have additional hours with a core curriculum. Finally, they've doubled the fines from the state on licensees who violate the discrimination laws. And where does that money go? It goes to pay for more testing. Nationally, NAR has responded vigorously, and I want to mention a couple of things in NAR's program. It's called ACT, A for accountability, C for culture change, T for training. Now, first, accountability. NAR has worked with your state association and every state association to examine state licensing laws and look for where they don't meet a national standard for supporting fair housing. Think about that. That's a national trade association making recommendations to its states for tougher training requirements on fair housing and holding licensees accountable for fair housing violations. That's very new. NAR found that there were a lot of states, about 1 out of 4, that didn't even expressly say that a licensee can be disciplined for a fair housing violation. Now, you also know that NAR has updated its code of ethics to bar hate speech. You know that NAR is supporting those companies and associations that want to try self-testing. Now, those wouldn't be public tests. You wouldn't see them on YouTube, but it would be an important deterrent if you knew that your brokerage might be testing the broker and agent. There's a pilot program underway right now to do that sort of self-testing with the first companies to volunteer. Now, under culture change, NAR says that changing the culture is probably the most difficult challenge. You saw that NAR's president apologized for the industry's role in perpetuating segregation, apologized for the long history of mortgage redlining, loans going only to white veterans, blockbusting, racial covenants, predatory subprime lending. You know that today, fair housing is a core component of the Realtor Code of Ethics. You may not know that for 50 years, that same Realtor Code of Ethics prohibited selling a home in a white neighborhood to a black person. You may not recall that NAR opposed the passage of the Fair Housing Act. NAR says, let's understand, let's agree that even if all these practices were in the past, their effects would carry on for generations through the wealth gap between races. I want to mention a couple of specific steps that NAR has taken in training. Many of you know that NAR has a new training tool called Fairhaven, developed after the Newsday series. It's a video game, a simulation. It's really well done. You're the agent or a customer trying to close deals, and fair housing problems come up. How do you handle them? It's at fairhaven.realtor. We've given you the link. Also, NAR has a new course on implicit bias. It's a 3-hour course that has been arranged to have CE credit in all the states. NAR also has a new film on brokers and agents who are embracing fair housing laws, making money doing it. It's called Being the Change. So you can find that online. The new course is called Bias Override. Now, we'll share these links with you with the recording of this session. All of this seems useful.
So, based on your investigations, what do you think are the best ways to combat racism in the industry, in real estate?
You know, our team of journalists often discussed how hard would it be to stop steering. It seemed clear that many realtors in our tests were unfamiliar with minority neighborhoods, didn't know about the brand new homes in Freeport, didn't have offices in those areas, didn't handle listings very often in those areas, and unfamiliarity and just had become used to steering around those areas over generations. That seemed to be part of it. And so this made us wonder whether brokers are making any effort to know whether steering is happening in their offices. Brokers, do you check on which listings agents give to customers? Do you say, what neighborhoods or schools did this person get? How well does that match up with what they actually asked for? And we'll talk about a form that NAR has to help keep track of that. I want to give a word on this to our law professor, Bob Schwem from Kentucky, who talks very briefly about how hard is it to stop steering. Let me just play that very brief video for you.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listings? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way? It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents. If you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, the professor really steps up to the plate there. I think the complexity, though, is that I trust that all of you want to obey the law. It might be useful to think, how might some disparities creep into our work? How does it actually work in our office? I want to share with you some best practices suggested by NAR and others. I'm not a lawyer, but I've tried to keep a list of best practices that have been shared. Let me quickly step through those with you. Here I think you're seeing a page from our investigation and meeting some of our testers here. I see a nurse, a retiree, an IRS worker, a college professor. And here are some suggestions on best practices. First, every customer should receive the same professional service. Show no more interest for one customer than another. Let's say you offer hospitality at a refreshment when someone comes to your office or at an open house. Offer it to everyone. Follow up with every customer in the same way. Checklists are useful in surgery, they're useful in landing an airplane, making sure that the same steps are followed. And they're useful in real estate as well. Consistency and systematic procedures are key. Do you have the same procedure for assigning all clients to an agent, not based on their appearance? Do you explain your services in the same way? Do you obtain the same initial information from everyone? Do you explain your commitment to fair housing laws? Do you offer the same services and referrals to every buyer and every seller? Does every customer leave your office with the same handouts? And do you keep good records of these contacts with customers? You can work out standard answers or scripts for your brokerage on difficult questions such as, which schools are good? You can convey the same helpful information to each client. You can explain that school test scores don't tell you which schools are good. You can encourage parents to do their own homework. Similarly, templates or drafts of emails and texts for communication with customers can help you ensure that you provide them all the same information. And that can help make sure that different agents in the same brokerage are providing the same service to customers when there's a seller's inquiry or a buyer's inquiry or going through the offer process. Talk about the property, not about the people. Identify from the customer the objective information about what the customer wants. Talk about the type of housing available, not about the populations. Don't suggest to some buyers that they drive around the neighborhood or hang out by the school looking at which mothers are waiting to meet the school bus. But you can tell them to go do their own homework and then come back and tell you when they've picked a neighborhood, when they've picked a school, then they'll get fewer listings, right? Stick to factual information, not opinion. The reputation of a community is not a fact. Safe is not a fact. Declining schools in demand, these are not a fact. Refer customers to primary sources of information. It's often said, be the source of the source. If they ask about crime, refer them to the police department. If they ask about schools, urge them to talk to the schools, to go look at the state education department website. Qualify customers in the same way. If you require a buyer agreement, require it of everyone. If you ask customers for ID, if you require pre-approval for a buyer, have that rule throughout your brokerage. Everyone apply it the same way. If you offer a referral to help with financing, offer it to everyone who is similarly situated. Give all listings to a buyer that fit their objective criteria. If they don't know what kind of housing they're looking for or where, they should get all the listings in your MLS. Allow the customer to make all the choices about features of the housing, price, communities, schools. Don't substitute your judgment for theirs. And when they add more criteria, they want a 3-car garage, they don't want a corner lot, they do want this school district, then they'll get fewer listings. Remember, you have an obligation not to discriminate against neighborhoods or sellers under the Fair Housing Act. Educate buyers and sellers about the fair housing laws. Complete your At Home with Diversity certification. Go through the fair housing simulation. It's free. It takes about an hour. Educate clients before an owner can exert pressure on you to disobey the fair housing laws. Before an agent, a seller can say, don't bring those sorts of people here, or don't have these sorts of clients in my rental. If an owner insists on making discriminatory choices, no children, no vouchers, tell them they must find another agent. I understand that you have a financial obligation to follow instructions and work in the best interest of the client, but that obligation stops when their instructions are not legal. And look at the advice from your attorneys and your association and state attorneys on the language used. Even today on Long Island, there are advertisements for, this home is great for families. This is a family-friendly neighborhood. Even today. Why did that agent put that language in one listing but not another? Discourage love letters or pick-me letters. Usually these letters reveal information about protected classes. Sure, it's possible to write a love letter that doesn't disclose anything about the buyer's family status, race, religion, national origin, age, children. But have you ever seen such a letter? A federal court in Oregon blocked a state law saying the state couldn't pass a law against love letters. But that doesn't mean you can't say to your customers, I won't pass them on, don't give them to me. And you can't say, you still can say to your sellers, I'm not going to give you those letters if I'm your agent. Present offers with only the financial information and terms. In a multiple offer situation, don't give the names of the characteristics of the buyers. Use a worksheet, a standard worksheet to convey that information. Offer number one, its terms, the financing, everything that's relevant, but the buyer's name is not relevant. And finally, NAR has a form. It's called the Equal Service Report. It's in the broker's handbook that will help you keep records. And brokers can monitor those reports to see what did the customer ask for and what did we give them. And that supervision increases the chances that different agents in a brokerage will treat people the same way. Now, I just want to give you this closing thought. Let's suppose, we're going to go back just for a moment to traffic tickets. Let's suppose the governor of your state asks you, how do we solve this problem that some people get a warning and some people get a break, they get a ticket, some a warning, some a ticket for going the same speed? That's an unequal application of justice. How do we solve that problem? You could have more training. That's a good idea, but might not do it. You could increase diversity on your police force. That's a good idea, but might not do it. What's the sure way to make sure that people get treated equally? Give them all the ticket. I know you couldn't get elected governor on this platform, but if everybody who was speeding, who got pulled over, got a speeding ticket, they won't be surprised, and you'll be treating people equally. As the professor says, why don't you give them all the listings? Don't pick and choose their neighborhoods. Pre-qualify them the same way. It's not that hard, as the professor says. And then we can move on to solving more difficult challenges. I appreciate your attention. You'll find our stories at newsday.com/divided. That's the simple address. And you may have questions for me in addition here, and we've got a few minutes. I'd like to hear those. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Bill. When I watched this documentary that you and the team put together about 2 years ago, it was very eye-opening for me. And it's nice to have you here because some questions did come up.
Thank you.
So you're here today to break it down for us. Thank you so much for your time and your information. We do have a few questions that came in. One of them asks, if a criteria and preference for a buyer is, say, academic merit, how do you best help them while not discriminating or steering? Say a buyer, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, what's an example?
Say a buyer is the one who says they want a good school. How do you recommend? What do you focus on? What aspects of the school that they're interested in? Maybe it's an award-winning band or a winning football team.
Well, it's okay to say, what are you looking for? The consistent advice is to urge them to do their own homework and to tell them that you're not experts in schools and no realtor is. I know that's hard. You're in a competitive business and you so many competition elements on the internet and from other agents, and it may feel uncomfortable to say, I'm not the one to choose your schools, but you're not the one to choose their schools. And the best advice is to urge them to go study and read and find public sources of information. Now, it is okay if they say, what we really want is the lacrosse program. You could say, well, I know who won the lacrosse championship in our district this year. I know that this football team has a new football coach. I know that band went to the Rose Bowl parade. It's okay to share information. It's okay to say, my kids went to this school. They had a very good experience. That's okay. There, the test is really going to be, are you giving the same information to everyone? And just think about it. You're the broker. You're the person whose license is on the line. How much confidence do you have that an agent will give that same answer to the question, which are the good schools, to every client. Are you really confident of that? And how in the world would you as a broker be confident that different agents in your office will give the same answer, because that's the legal standard, to every customer? You could never achieve that confidence unless your policy is to say, we're not picking and choosing your schools. We're not going to tell you which schools are good. We're going to say, go do your homework. That's the only answer to this question that I can imagine you could be confident would be employed by everybody in the office.
It sounds like a really good policy to put in place. We had another question come in, very similar, a little different. When a buyer says to the agent that they want to be in a certain neighborhood or school district or close to a specific place of worship, should the agent also include other areas in their listings to be fair, or stick to the guidelines that the client specified?
If they say, I want to be in Moore Park, you're perfectly okay to tell them, to give them only listings in Moore Park. The religious example is a little tricky. I'm not a lawyer, and I'm not a lawyer in California, but I can tell you what I keep hearing consistently. I keep hearing consistently, don't be the one deciding what's near. I understand Orthodox Jews, for example, want to live near, must live near a temple that they can walk to because they can't drive on the Sabbath. I get that. But it's not up to you to decide what's near. Tell the customer, when you go if your temple location is important to you, go look at where all the temples are. It's not hard to find out. And then come back and tell me which area. If you draw me a map or you sort it down and narrow it down for me, I'll give you only the listings in that area. I'll be glad to help you. But let them draw the boundaries.
Thank you. Perfect. If you're worried about your client getting discriminated against for their name written on the contracts, how can you protect them? Is it your job to do that?
Well, the consistent advice that I keep hearing is I understand that they have to have the names on the contract, unless they're going to go set up an LLC to hide the name, which people do. It doesn't mean that all your communication with the seller's agent and has what the seller then gives to the seller has to include names. I understand now people have doorbell cameras and they know who came to their house today, and they know they got an offer tonight, and they'll put 2 and 2 together. I get that. But the main advice that I keep hearing is to be wary of providing information to the seller that allows the seller. I talked to a seller recently who said, oh, you know, the first 12 people who came and looked at our homes were all Jewish families from our neighborhood and such. And then the next 20 people were all Asian families. And they didn't know that from a doorbell camera. They knew that from their agent. And what's happening there is that agent is putting the agent and the seller in jeopardy of committing a fair housing violation or of being accused of committing a fair housing violation. But if you don't give the seller that information, then the seller can then testify truthfully, no, I didn't even know. I picked only on the merits and didn't even know anything about the buyers other than the terms of their offer. It's okay to present multiple offers as number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4 without the names. I understand contracts are going to have names.
Yeah, we have a nice form through the California Association of Realtors that allows us to do that, to just lay out the basics of each offer and present it that way. It's a useful tool. 2 more questions. Second to last is, do you think if steering doesn't get tamed, we could see more government regulation in the real estate industry?
It's clear that the industry thinks there will be more regulation. Industries propose self-regulation as a way to prevent more government regulation. We'll police ourselves. We'll do testing of ourselves because they don't want more media investigations. They don't want more government investigations. It's clear that testing, I think, if nothing else, our stories demonstrated that testing is the only way to know whether steering's happening or not. And so definitely going to see more testing by the industry, by fair housing groups, which can lead to lawsuits. Our test just led to newspaper stories, not lawsuits. And you're going to see more testing by HUD and the U.S. Department of Justice, which is paying a lot more attention now to redlining and steering and related issues.
Thank you. Is there any further reading or podcasts or anything else you would recommend to our agents? Thank you for including Fairhaven. That's an incredible tool. I really enjoyed taking that, and I will look into the bias override. But are there any other tools or resources out there that you would recommend that we take advantage of?
You know, there have been a variety of books about race and real estate in the last 3 years, especially. But and many of you have read, for example, The Color of Law, the Rosenstein book, which is the best place to start with about the history of steering and segregation in housing, The Color of Law. I've shown you only about 10 minutes of our 40-minute documentary film, and there are 11 stories online. So many of you may have seen part of the video, maybe even the whole 40 minutes, but not read the articles. So I'd send you there. I think that there's not been enough awareness. People have not had their antenna up enough. For example, just last week, Berkshire Hathaway's mortgage office settled a case with the U.S. Department of Justice and paid out millions of dollars in a settlement involving accusations of redlining. But how many of you really heard about that or got that in your real estate news? The big study by Freddie Mac in the past year of differences in the appraisal industry. I've talked to appraisers who are completely unaware that that's an issue that's getting a lot of federal government attention now and industry association attention. So part of this has to do with keeping your antenna up, whether you go to Inman or wherever you get your real estate news, clicking on those stories, being better informed just by watching for those headlines.
Great advice. Thank you so much. Last year, we brought Richard Rothstein to our association. He did an incredible webinar for us in the fall. And we have a few more of his books available for any of our members to pick up for free. If you're interested, please email me or Evelyn Schultz at the association, and we'd be happy to give you The Color of Law. Well, with that, Bill, I think we're good. You answered so many questions in your amazing presentation, and we don't have any other questions coming in. Thank you. And thank you, Tommy, for your great moderating today. And we really appreciate that you came here today to give us all this wonderful information.
Thank you, Brooke, Tommy, Evelyn. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you having me get a chance to share our team's work with you. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you. We'll be sending a follow-up email to everybody with links to these resources and a link to the documentary so that you can see that on your own. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.